one thing to have a preset expectation for whatever subject it may be, whether it would be a film, game, or matters pertaining to varying reasons. Maybe it's a sequel, an adaptation, or you just thought it looked cool. But then there are moments in life where you lack any apparent expectations for one thing or another. Maybe you choose not to have any, or maybe you don't even know about it, which leads into the topic of this review, Steins Gate. Adapted from the visual novel of the same name, Steins Gate was directed by Hiyoshi Hamasaki and Takuya Sato, and written by Juki Hanada, who also wrote my all-time favorite anime, Chobits. I have no other way to describe how I came across Steins Gate other than it being a blind leap of faith, having been uninitiated with the source material or anything else in relation. So blind, in fact, that I wasn't even paying attention to anime lineups at the time, watching shows that just interest me, out of pure curiosity. And it's because of said curiosity that I went on to witness one of my favorite animes that I have ever had the pleasure of seeing. Yup, I just outright said it. I love Steins Gate, and as I realized fairly recently, it's one of those shows that I can manage to watch multiple times, and still feel part satisfied and part enriched, the same way I felt when I first saw it. To feel this way is a rare commodity, as I normally prefer not to rewatch an anime, since I don't feel as interested as I was before because I've seen it before. So what makes this a worthy exception? Sit back, relax, and go El Sai Kongru as I give you my evaluation of Steins Gate.
Also known as Christina.
Steins Gate is mainly centered around our main character, the eccentric Hoii Koma, aka Okabe Rintaro, a university student with an affinity for lab coats, nicknames, fake phone conversations, and cola. He is friends with Mayuri Shina, an upbeat, silly, and likable teenage girl with a cosplaying hobby, and Itaru Hashida, aka Daru, a skilled hacker and otaku who loves some 2D girls and never keeps it a secret. One day, after attending a science lecture, Okabe encounters Makise Kurisu, a young and prodigious scientist whom he enters a non-contextual conversation with. The talk goes nowhere, and leaves us with a bit of confusion of just what she was getting at. He hears a loud scream from upstairs and investigates it, only to find out that Makise has been murdered. Things get complicated from there, as after he sends a text to Daru, things mysteriously shift and change, and revelations are eventually shown. His texts travel through time, and Makise is not dead. But how can it be? This is where the show truly takes wing. As time travel is introduced and explored, new characters show up, secrets are revealed, things change, and points that were enigmatic begin to clarify. However, little does anyone know that the more things change, the worse events become. And what was a somewhat ordinary sci-fi repertoire of time travel, plane shifting, and cause and effect becomes a thriller about a man who must fix the damage he has done in order to save the ones he cares for most, and ultimately, the future. An adventure that spans across time and multiple world variations begins.
Delicate as an orchid, fair as a cherry blossom, personification of feminine grace, and a dude.
This is mainly a passive anime that gives us character interactions, dynamics, humor, and exposition, but shows more and more of its serious, suspenseful, and proactive nature as things gradually fall to pieces. There's a lot that happens throughout the show, and is filled to the brim with ideas that shape the narrative into a roller coaster of multi-layered plot elements, twists and turns, dramatic set pieces, subplots, and insightful developments that practically set the story on a different path, much like the characters themselves. So much is this made apparent, to the point where I would have to streamline certain aspects for the sake of pacing. So stick with me as best as you can, because this isn't going to be easy. To delve into Steins Gate is to bring up its numerous concepts. It has a multiple worlds idea in the form of world lines, each holding different possibilities, events, and fates that form an entirely distinct timeline, but ultimately amplify the same outcome in more ways than one, something Okabe is desperate to prevent. How things change throughout the series relies either on D-mail, text messages that can travel to any past date, or time leaps, where Okabe's consciousness goes from one point to another, a sort of body transfer across time, if you will, and the unique twist comes in the form of reading Steiner, where Okabe maintains his memories of past events while others don't. These are the roots that make up the premise of Steins Gate, since to change the past is to change the present. If one wanted to prevent another person's death or change their gender before their subsequent birth, that can be done. However, it comes at the cost of bringing the inevitable into fruition at a much faster rate, the more world lines are traveled. I found this to be a refreshing, conceptually varied direction, since instead of the usual time paradox, it implies the idea of infinite worlds, and that to change something is not to ruin the pathways of time, but to simply diverge to another. Twists, mystery, and light action are abound on Okabe's plight, including jaw-dropping moments that I couldn't initially believe. And while I can't spoil much, to say the show isn't effective at driving great emotion is a big lie. How dark, atmospheric, provoking, exciting, stirring, and passionate it all gets is something of a massive game changer to an already interesting time travel themed story, and it's in these moments where the thrills are most prominent. Steins Gate holds no bars when it comes to displaying how much shit Okabe must go through to save everyone, with all the psychological instabilities and emotional stress withstanding. He suffers throughout the adventure, and if he didn't have the support needed to chug along in the hopes of achieving his goal, it all would have been for nothing. Which leads to the main meat of the show. its cast of characters, who are probably the most important cogs in the whole machine since they are needed to make everything work the way it does. In a story of death, fates, and a sense of overarching fear among the inevitable, Steins Gate is not an entirely happy anime, but it's not a depressing one, and if anything, it displays a well-rounded tone thanks to the characters. This has got to be one of the best casts that I've ever seen in an anime, with a myriad of personalities, emotional ranges, and likable qualities in tow. From the main cast to the supporting cast, there's not a single character that lacks any sort of dimension, and it all culminates into a main driving force for our story. From Mayuri's virtually childlike yet somewhat fragile personality, to Makise's need to display an attitude while being the main supporter of Okabe's efforts, with others displaying their own characteristics, relationships, and balance, we get to know them from how they bond. Having conversations, exchanging banter, outputting genuine concern, empathy, and emotionally charged humanity, the cast pisses chemistry into a proverbial bag, and it does so with little need for exposition or lowering them to being flat-out cliches. Granted, backstories exist, but they aren't so much used to give context on why the characters are the way they are, but more like context on why the story should go on, why Okabe should keep going on. Okabe cares, and we do too, because we have a reason why. You are pulled along with him, and it doesn't let you go. And if they weren't emphasized to this degree, the show would still work in its own right, but nowhere near as well as it does now. To see characters drive a story this actively isn't something that happens often, but lo and behold, Steins Gate executes this aspect with a proficient result that fills the land with an imperative substance. It grips you from the core with the multifaceted elements of the plot in conjunction with our great cast of fleshed out characters, and makes for an engrossing story that will leave you hanging every time an episode ends, to make you wanting more and more until the end. Something this enticing and well put together is few and far between, and to finish this was like opening a void in my soul where it will accept nothing but a copious mass of Steins Gate. That or more chobits, but I'm getting off track. What's important is that it's an advantageous anime that managed to fulfill itself in collective strokes. All in all, I was really hooked with the plot. But now it's on to the next question. How's Steins Gate's presentation? Does it look and sound like a true next-gen experience?
When you're on a chicken bender, grab a box of chicken tenders. Bok, bok, bok.
Produced by White Fox, Steins Gate is an anime where the visuals complement the story at large, if not mirror it. A story involving despair over a period of trial and error, but also one of conquering a bad situation, and to see it through to the end. That there is hope at every corner, sometimes in places where you least expect it. This was visually interpreted in its mundane, slightly grim, otherworldly, but lush, natural, and emphatic aesthetic, basing itself on a direction that's half bleak with its use of washed out colors, digi lighting, and shadowing, but also half optimistic, with bright environmental lighting, rich colors, and other details to offset its cascading dreariness. Not saying it's the most visually impressive anime, but rather it's one that outputs a justly prerogative to go side by side with what it seeks to consummate with. When you get to animation, it's a solid effort for the most part, featuring fluid animation when needed, and can make a scene bathe within its visual design, bringing things to life with an appropriate and pronounced initiative. Sure, one could say that since Steins Gate isn't exactly vehement, this isn't anything special, and while that could be the case, even if it isn't the most radiated anime ever made, it still has plenty to see and experience, so for it to not look good would be a detrimental outcome. Then we come to audio, something Steins Gate also succeeds at. Characters are written to have a momentously charismatic grace to almost each of them, but at the end of the day, it's the actors that provide it all, giving them life with inaugural force. From the over-the-top but down-to-earth and caring Okabe Rintaro, to the rest of our amiable main cast comprising of the ditzy though somewhat tragic Mayuri, the perverse yet manageably admirable Daru, the talented yet open Makise, to others in the supporting cast, the performances shine. But what am I talking about here? Japanese or English? The answer is both, with an English dub that simultaneously adapts each individual character's personality, energy, and integrity, which is saying something considering the ranges. J. Michael Tatum leads the pack with his true-to-form Okabe, Trina Nishimura gets it rolling with her symmetrical role as Makise, Jackie Ross and Tyson Reinhardt grab the reins of Mayuri and Daru respectively, while others launch their roles with a familiar, veritable form. They complete scenes with befitting performances across the board, administering essential elements that make up their roles to begin with, even as the story takes a different direction. Now you could go subs over dubs on my ass by saying, Hoi Kyoma isn't wild enough and Mayuri isn't as high-pitched, but if you ask me, what matters most is if the spirit translated properly, maintaining an equivalent impact to their Japanese lingual counterparts. Is the character the same? So if you want a recommendation of what language to see this in, both will suit your needs. When it comes to music, the best way to describe it is that it's mostly subtle and downplayed, a direction that aims to amplify a sort of aura in any given scene, though it can ramp up when needed. It mainly comprises of pianos, violins, drums, guitars, and other instruments, as well as light orchestral melodies, ambient and ominous noise effects, and electronic beats and cues to create a manageable listening experience that's potentially peaceful, soothing, invigorating, tense, inauspicious, and head-noddingly catchy in one musical score. When shit gets hot, the music follows suit, and while it never gets explosive diarrhea hot, it intensifies when the action arises, as tracks get more and more rapid and powerful, though these moments are a little rare. So as a show that expects you to feel amped with an absorbent amount of haunting tension at your feet, the soundtrack for Steins Gate is delightfully fitting, characterizing the show with an effective sound. Add the soundtrack to the rock-hard visual presentation and voice work, and you have a great presentation in general. A mixture of known and unknown, dull and vivid, but most importantly, hopeless and hopeful. An excellent balance of light and dark that finds its way into the core of the anime and propels it to where it counts most. And on a line of questions and doubt, it's good to see that Okabe's journey is well made.
I can feel the cosmos.
I like science fiction, I like thrillers, I like mysteries, and I can like dramas if the characters display sincere charisma, depth, and believability. And here comes something that offers all of that in an intriguing concoction. Steins Gate goes above and beyond the call of and expels its load with maximum force. I know I'm sounding like I'm taking this show Slim Jim, but that's because I am, and with good reason. To amass this much gratifying, alleviating satisfaction is something I feel much admiration towards. This is, without a doubt, one of the most refreshing animes that I have ever seen within the last 3.5 years, synonymous with the likes of Fate Zero, Madoka, and company. One where I would happily give a hearty fuck about, while jumping up and down like a hopping bee knowing that a goddamn movie came out. Should you see Steins Gate? Abso-fucking-lutely! You owe yourself that much, and to pass this one off is almost like passing off a chance to see Drive. It's your loss. Unless you don't like sci-fi thrillers, in which case go see it anyway. It might change your mind. So L, Sci, Congru, Kitty Vickies. L, Sci, Congru.